You're listening to the Bluejay Breakdown with Anna Bellinghausen.
Welcome to the Bluejay Breakdown. I'm Anna Bellinghausen along with Andrew Rogers. Andrew, thanks so much for joining me today again.
Hey, always. Anytime you ask me to come on, Anna, I will do it.
Straight from Nebraska Furniture Mart.
Yeah. Oh, man. Is that place a mess? Kind of like Creighton basketball right now.
Creighton men's basketball drops out of the AP polls for the first time this season. 4-game losing skid. Are you worried if you're a Bluejay fan?
No, I'm more worried about this chair kind of creaking, so I got to maybe just sit really still, which is hard for me to do. No, I wouldn't say I'm worried. It's more, I feel it's better that this is happening so early on in the season, opposed to maybe in the midst of Big East play. They're figuring themselves out. They're a younger team. It's a team that hasn't really found its connection, even though we thought they did. Like, so early on, it was like, man, this team looks flawless. Nothing's wrong with them. Shots are falling. Things are good.
Yep.
And then when they're faced with a bit of adversity, they're struggling to find a way through that. So happening early on is so much better than, like I said, back into the season when you're approaching March. But, you know, at this rate, the rate that they're on, 2 teams that they lost to should have been wins.
Right.
And whether or not you're without a player or your shots aren't falling, because of who you have on this team and because of how much we talked about their depth being such a big thing for them, and that's not even helping them at this point, that's cause for concern for me. But not to say that Coach D can't find a way through it and help lead this team back. I just want to see somebody step up in a big way, especially tonight against a good Sun Devils team.
For sure. I mean, you look at the NET rankings, net rankings, Arizona State is at 26. So they're a great team, and they've done damage this year against good opponents. Obviously, you don't get that ranking unless you're beating high-caliber teams. Creighton right now is 46 in those same rankings, so it's a big drop down for Creighton. But Andrew, to your point, Arthur Kaluma had 27 points a career night for him. Felt like a breakout game. I mean, he's been on NBA draft boards preseason and everything like that. Of course, he fouls out. It felt like he did everything for that team. And it, back to your point again about the depth of the squad, it stinks not seeing that pull through when you need it most. And it's kind of like, okay, when is it going to happen? It feels like. Yeah.
And, you know, Arthur is somebody that I heavily critiqued early on because I felt that, man, he's dribbling way too much out there. He's trying to be the guy when he doesn't have to be the guy. And that's when everybody was healthy on the floor. And now it came to the point where I'm like, okay, maybe those mistakes were good for him because he was able to
kind of learn.
Well, not only just learn, but humble himself a little bit and say, that's not a strength of my game. What are my strengths? And really, it's moving without the basketball most of the time. He does a very good job of cutting to the rim, finding his shot and the shot that he's looking for. He's better on pump fakes now, which I've noticed is since the Maui tournament. He's getting his defender to jump and to bite, and then there he goes. He finds his way to the rack. Arthur did such a good job, and as you said it, career high 27 points. He's averaging, 12, 13 a game.
Right, it was his game.
But it also was a game to where he wasn't in his usual spot, right? Because he started on the inside, which was weird to me that they put him there. And not to say that he's not a tall guy,
right.
6'7". We're just so used to Kalkbrenner that I'm not used to seeing Arthur Kaluma down low. But I thought he did a really good job of working the post most of that game. And as you said, him fouling out late, I wouldn't say that was end-all, be-all for this team because against BYU, I mean, that 5 on the floor.
Still should have found a way.
Yeah, the 5 on the floor came back from down 10. My biggest knock just for Creighton as a whole now is why did it take so long to get going? When did you sit back, look at the clock, and say, if we don't start now, we don't have a chance? That needs to go at the 5-minute mark, not the 2-minute mark.
100%. I mean, start that run a little bit earlier. Creighton can pull away at least by 5 points against BYU. Well, let's talk about the final progression of that game and Coach McDermott's decision not to call a timeout on that last possession. 8 seconds left on the clock, and then kick it out to Sharif Mitchell. He misses that three-pointer. He was open. It was a good look at the basket.
Why do you think he was open, though?
Because he wasn't the shooter.
He's not a shooter.
Wanted.
And even still, who else was open at the time? Was it Alexander that made the drive? I think it was Trey Alexander that drove in, got stuck at the paint, cutting to the rack right at that same time. And I know it was in the midst of traffic, but was Baylor Shireman.
Yeah.
And that's something to me where I'm like, I'm handing it off to my shooter. I'm not even looking Mitchell's way. And it's not a knock on Sharif Mitchell. But when I look at him, I don't think, oh, this guy is going to put the ball in the bucket for me unless he's at the rack. He's somebody that can get the ball, drive to the rack because he's got a great first step. But when you have Shireman, who's been on the floor the whole time, that's been reading the game well, if you get him the basketball, he is the guy that is going to be your go-to scorer. That's not Sharif Mitchell. In regards to your point on Coach D not calling the timeout, I respected what he said in the press conference where he's like, hey, we worked on these drills in practice.
And you stick to that.
Yeah, you don't want to...
That's a trust thing.
You don't want to mess things up. However, when there is that much time left, I feel like when you work on those in practice, you don't have Sharif Mitchell in your starting five.
Right.
Your starting five is your starting five for a reason. And when you work on that play, it's like, okay, we have Shireman to work toward. We have Nembhard. We have Alexander. You have Kaluma. And you have Kalkbrenner. But now you're without Kaluma and Kalkbrenner.
Which is huge.
So now it changes the whole perspective for me. Not to say that everybody can't, plug and play. But in this case, I looked at... Man, get across half court, you call timeout, as you said, because I think there was like 12 seconds when they inbounded the ball. So you call timeout. Now you have 8 seconds to set up a play. You can get Farabello in there, who's not the best at defending, but can work around the three and shoot the ball if need be. Not to say that BYU wouldn't be all over him and think that's the only point of his game, so I'm going to close out hard. But Farabello's known to do that. That's not Mitchell's game. I didn't like that look. I thought it was forced. And... it just kind of collapsed in Creighton's hand.
Well, BYU was also completely crumbling at the moment, so I feel like if they would have called that timeout, Coach Mack is a smart enough basketball coach to draw up a very intricate play that they've worked on over and over again to get a shooter in a great position. And maybe, to your point, it was just a forced shot from Sharif, and he obviously wasn't comfortable. He doesn't shoot from there that often, so it's tough to see him. I know Sharif probably feels absolutely awful after that. So,
he's not to blame.
No,
there was so much wrong that happened in this game.
Exactly.
I mean, you look at just how many points in the paint BYU got in this game because Kalkbrenner wasn't in there.
Yeah.
42 points in the paint for the Cougars.
That just kills you.
42 points. That's half of their score.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't let them eat like that inside. Now, missing that big presence of Kalkbrenner, though, that with shot blocking ability, somebody to really turn people away, it would have forced BYU to shoot the ball more. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
And because they were able to change up their game plan in order to work in their favor, they just kind of took it to Creighton, and Creighton didn't have an answer. Like, every time they would answer with a bucket, BYU would answer right back with a bucket.
And that's when... you look to those leaders on this team, and that brings me to my next question. Who are the leaders on this team? Who is the leader? I want it so badly to be Baylor Shireman, and I think
everybody does.
I think he has the ability to, but I just don't see it yet. Last year, Ryan Hawkins, he was the dude. He was the guy.
And it's hard to recreate him.
You can't. I mean, the amount of experience that guy had, Baylor has just as much as Ryan Hawkins did. I mean... Given Ryan was in a D2 school, but he had won championships over and over, and he'd done it at a very high level at Northwest Missouri State. But you bring in a guy like Baylor Shireman, and he's had the time to gel with the team and whatnot. Obviously, he fits in, but I just haven't seen the leadership taking over those late moments of the game. Like, why is Sharif Mitchell taking the shot? He should demand the basketball at that point. If you are in that position, you have the respect from your teammates. Not like Sharif doesn't, but... At that point, you're like, put the ball in my hands or I'm taking over. Like, I'm taking over this
And you know who does that really well?
Trey, R2?
Well, not even just on this team. It's a team that beat them earlier this year. You look at Kisei Tominaga.
Yeah.
He's somebody that just says, give me the ball, I'm going to make the shot. And he's a guy coming off the bench. And that's what it is. It comes down to true confidence.
Yep.
You have to believe in your own abilities, and you have to know that you're the best player on the floor.
I think the team just needs more swagger.
And they do. And you're right. I love the point when you bring up Ryan Hawkins, but the biggest thing that he has that nobody else has is that he went the distance, right? They go all the way. You know how much leadership and experience, how much experience, first off, that comes from that, but the leadership that tends to grow and what you visually see from your teammates at that time, and just knowing that, I can learn something here, or I can pick up on what he said here. Right. And then he was able to bring that to Creighton. that all totality experience that he was able to grasp up in one nucleus, he brought that to Creighton, and he was able to succeed and exceed because of that.
And not like Hawk is the most vocal guy on the court. Like, he wasn't the guy that was yelling in huddles and stuff, but you could see his confidence and his like, okay, I'm taking over this moment for this game, for this team. I just don't feel that with anybody on this Creighton team. There's so many good players individually. I just want to see more of... Everyone's unselfish on this team. I know that. They talk about it so much. It's the first thing they bring up whenever anybody asks about a big night a player has. It's about the unselfishness of the team, the ball movement, everything like that. But sometimes you need to push that away and be like, okay, I'm going to be the guy for this team. Who is that?
You got to look for a little bit of selfishness.
Yeah. And I want to see more of that. Like, I feel hesitation sometimes with the shots, and guys aren't shooting when they always say the green light. Greg McDermott is a big proponent of the let it fly movement, and that's how this Creighton team and program has been built upon. But it's like, who is that guy? That's my biggest question down the stretch.
They need to
figure that out before Big East play.
They absolutely need to, but they're just all so good at what they do. I don't think anyone can decide on this team who is that guy. And frankly, I think that comes down to coach. Yeah. Coach has to make that decision for the team. And whether it's you put the ball in your best shooter's hands or you put the ball in the hands of the guy that gets to the rack the best, that's who I'm going with. Yeah. I'm not looking for somebody that, you know, if it's Baylor Shireman, for example, like I know Baylor can get to the rim, no problem, but something that Baylor does a really good job of too is getting his back to his defender, maybe backing him down a little bit more and finding a way to use a little bit of a, how do I put it? Like just a rainbow lob in the paint, something that is just like a floater-esque shot. It doesn't have to be somebody that gets to the rack so much. Ryan Nembhard, though, is somebody that I really love to see off the dribble.
Who went off against Texas and did the same thing, like just took over that game, but I didn't see that.
And he had a really nice reverse in the game late in that game, which really helped get Creighton even closer.
And that's just being creative and creating things for your team.
But that's what we need him to be. He was on all of the big boards. He was on all the big boards for a reason as a potential breakout player in all of NCAA men's basketball this year. We need to see more of that stuff. You need to see more of Baylor Shireman maybe sitting around the perimeter. You need to see more of Trey Alexander being a good facilitator or setting off-ball screens. You need to see more of Arthur Kaluma finding his stride, whether it's inside or out. And then you need Kalkbrenner back to really set the tone on the inside. And once you have all those pieces, it works. But what doesn't work right now is when you're without one and finding somebody to flip the switch in the back of their head and say, now it's my turn.
It just seems like things are pulling in different directions and styles of basketball are so different with different players. I'm trying to think, like, 8 seconds left on the clock. Who do you want driving to the basket on this team?
Ryan Nembhard. Hands down. I think he's the guy.
I go between him and Trey as well, though.
And Trey is great, but Trey has had more off nights than good nights.
Agreed. If you would have asked me this last year, it would have been Trey hands down. But this year, I don't feel that as much.
No, Ryan Nembhard stepped up in a big way for me. He's matured in himself. He's matured in his game. And he's the guy that I want driving to the rack. I don't care if he's one of the smaller guys on the floor. Smaller guys can make do with their size because of their creativeness, as you put it, once you get closer to the rack. But he beats guys. If you're faster than somebody else, take them. There were so many mismatches in that game when you're looking at Ryan Nembhard against one of their bigs, and you're like, he's going to beat him off the dribble. Yeah. So that's what I want to see more from him.
Need that swagger.
You need to find it.
Just need that swagger for sure. Well, speaking of swagger, how about the women's?
They're playing with a lot of fire right now.
Playing with a lot of fire. So they beat Drake, and Drake is no joke. I mean, that's a team that beat USD, that beat Nebraska, that took Iowa to overtime, took UMass to overtime. They're a great team, a very well-coached squad there by Allison Pullman. It's her second year at the helm, and she's done a great job of taking over that Drake team. But talking to Flan and that women's basketball team, they went on a 5-game road trip, come back home and beat a great Drake team. Yes, they dropped a game to St. John's. It's a conference game, though. You know, it's any given night in the Big East. Any team could win. They know each other so well, and that was a tough one on the road for sure, but I think there's so many bright spots of this women team. 4 of the 5 starters are averaging double digits. It's just, they got a lot going on.
Yeah, take out what they did in the fourth quarter. I mean, they were shooting the ball 40+% from the field, and you got contribution from everywhere.
Yep.
And shockingly to me was Mogensen having one of her worst games and Creighton still being able to put up 75 points. I mean, that just goes to show, like, it's just like the men's team. When things are clicking, when you have your group out there, things are going to go right for this Blue Jay group.
They need to take some notes from what Coach Flan has been implementing. I mean, those women have done a really great job, and just the ability to score. And what's really impressed me is Lauren Jensen. She averages almost 18 points a game, and she is the number one target of every opponent's game plan, right? They're putting the best perimeter defender on her every single time, but she still finds way to scores. In my mind, like, if you're comparing her to the men's team, I compare her to R2 in a way, and just finding those ways to score no matter what and driving to the basket. She can hit the mid-range. She can hit the threes. Emma Ronce, a great post player, can also hit threes. Just so much. There's so many different ways this team can score. I think Creighton, no matter where they end up in whatever seed they'll get in March Madness, they're going to be a problem for every single team that faces them. It's like a nightmare team to face.
Well, and it goes to show that Creighton had so many more offensive possessions just based on the rebounding margin here.
Yeah.
And you see Drake put up 40 rebounds, and you're like, wow, I mean, they must have had a lot of offensive boards. But really, they only had 2 more offensive boards than Creighton in this game, and it was 40-28. I mean, a 12 rebounding swing, that's a lot. But then you look at how many extra shots that Creighton had 5 extra shots. They also got their points at the foul line, which were good. Pretty much an even match there. But then you look at how well they shot the 3.
Right. And that's a difference maker.
I mean, you shoot the ball 50% from downtown, you're fine.
Exactly.
And Drake did the same thing, but Creighton did it one step better. And that's just what you have to admire when you look at this group.
100%. And the fast pace that Creighton plays with also got matched up heavily against Drake. And that's why it was such a competitive game towards the end. I mean, when I talked to Coach Flan, he's like, the one thing about this game is that no lead is safe and no deficit is too large to overcome between these two teams, because there's so many possessions that can happen in such a short amount of time that it was anyone's game at that point in the fourth quarter. I think Drake was down 13 points, and they came back all the way from that. It was like 10 or 12, something
pretty
like
close.
that.
I mean, it was even more than that. I think they were down like 17 points going into the fourth quarter.
It was getting like out of hand at one point, and then Drake just comes kind of roaring back. But to your point about rebounds, Drake's the number one defensive rebounding team in the NCAA, so really impressive that Creighton women's won that rebounding battle.
Well, you look at the stats too, and Drake mirrored a lot of what BYU did in this basketball game. They got a lot of points in the paint, and thank goodness Creighton shot the ball as well as they did, because they wouldn't have won this game if it weren't for them being able to put the ball in from the 3-point line.
It's all about the shot makers.
It really is. Well, Drake had 40 points in the paint in this game. 40 points in a women's basketball game. Like, they like to get to the rack. It's obvious, right? And then you look at Creighton, who only had 18 points in the paint. So that's a separation of 22 points. Where are you making that up? But Creighton did that. So you can get away with allowing points in the paint. You can get away with maybe being outbodied a little bit down low because your shooters are better. And comes back to confidence.
100% confidence. And also Drake plays a zone defense as well, and Creighton hasn't really faced too many of those. I mean, the closest thing they come to that in the Big East play is DePaul and how they play, but to do that well against a zone that they haven't been playing against the entire season also says a lot, and to find those shooters in the big moments down the stretch also matters a lot, and the defense that they're playing was elite. Also, I mean, Drake hadn't been held to under 80 points the entire season. They average 85 points a game, and to your point, Andrew, just about the scoring options between both teams, I mean, it's really impressive. It's funny because you'd think barely beating a Drake team would not help your ranking, but Creighton women's basketball goes from 18 to 16. Just goes to show, like, Drake is a legit team, and down the line, I think we'll see them in March Madness if they win out in the MVC.
I'd like to see more bench production from both the men and women moving forward, though.
For sure.
That's something where they both lack. If you look at the men, for example, it's kind of been their kryptonite all year. Like, who's going to come off the bench? And I know Farabello did it the game before BYU.
But it's been inconsistent.
But it's been very inconsistent. You look at the Cougars, they had 38 bench points opposed to Creighton's 8 points. You can't have 8 bench points in a game where you're without Kalkbrenner for the entirety of it, and Kaluma for a good portion because he's dealing with foul trouble. Somebody's got to step up in this depth. We talked about depth and how depth is kind of an underappreciated stat when it comes to practice or when it comes to the game, but an overappreciated stat when you're in practice. You got to see more of it.
Right.
I need somebody on the bench to really step up. As for the women, kind of the same look. I know that they had more bench points in this game than Drake, but I really need to see more than just what Malley can do, Mogensen can do, Jensen, the whole 9 yards.
100%. I mean, you'll see that tested. If you look at the Creighton women's schedule upcoming, they've got Arkansas, great team. I think they're receiving votes as well. I'm not sure if they've cracked the top 25. They might have actually recently, but then they go and play Stanford. And then they open up Big East play again with UConn. So they've got...
Is UConn good?
I think they have some pretty good players. I mean, that Gino guy...
I do feel bad for Paige.
I do.
I mean, that really stinks.
It stinks. Obviously, last year she was out as well with an ACL, and then it happens again. But I remember I was at the UConn game. It was at DJ Sokol Arena, and just the line of little girls waiting to get her autograph and a picture with her. Tell me the last time you've seen that in a women's basketball game. I mean, have
outside
you ever
of
really...
Caitlin Clark?
Right, Caitlin Clark. I mean, like, the Brittany Griner days, maybe her, people lining up to, like, talk to her. I mean, you think of...
It's very few and far between.
Right, and she's done so much for the game, and the NIL world as well. She was in the Forbes 40 under 40, or 30 under 30, I think. She was put in that category with all the NIL deals, and she does a lot for her teammates, too. Like, she spreads the wealth around that squad. And yeah,
but Paige
I feel
too.
bad.
Without her, Creighton is still UConn's still successful.
Oh yeah.
So keep that in mind when you approach any matchup against this Huskies group.
Yeah, I can't wait for that one. It's going to be really fun. Well, two great matchups on deck. So we got Creighton women's against Arkansas on Saturday, and then tonight ASU in Vegas. Creighton men's basketball really needs a win.
Is it time they get over the hump? I prompted that on the show this morning.
Get a marginal win, Creighton, and just win some confidence back from this fan base.
Oh, and no Kalkbrenner?
Yeah, no Kalkbrenner is the word I have on the street.
Not official?
Not official, just the word on the street.
No, I mean,
they'll have to find ways.
They're going to have to find a way. Because you look back at that BYU game and you're like, we can beat them.
Yeah.
On paper, you look at your roster
100%.
against BYU's, and even without Kalkbrenner, that's a win. Against Arizona State,
it's going to be tougher.
Did the line shift?
I don't know.
Do you talk about betting on this show, Anna?
Well, we should. Honestly, they're in Vegas, so what happens in Vegas,
you know
man?
What? It will hopefully comes back with our friends, right?
Yeah, seriously.
At least a W, college basketball. This is such good radio here.
What's the line at?
I'm scrolling. There it is. Creighton's -3 still. It was 3.5 earlier today.
Points. Okay.
So I guess
Vegas has faith.
Because Kalkbrenner hasn't been officially ruled out, right? I can safely say that.
I don't think I've seen it officially released. I've just
Somebody can correct me if not. If he does get ruled out, then I'd be interested to see
where the line goes.
It could be a pick 'em.
Yeah.
Because Creighton can win this game without Kalkbrenner. They shoot the ball like they did against Arizona, against Arkansas, against Texas Tech. You win. Good Lord, Andrew. Words are hard. You win this game. That's it. Plain and simple.
100%. Well, we'll see what happens. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me in another edition of Bluejay Breakdown.
Sure. Obviously, I'm tired.
Yeah, jeez. Go get some rest. Did you buy a new bed at Nebraska Furniture Mart you can go take a nap on?
No, I did not buy a bed. I was looking at couches, actually.
Well, go take a little nap on that.
Take a snoozer on the new couch.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks so much. Can't wait to see what the Blue Jays do tonight. Arizona State. Let's go.
A Hurrdat Sports Network production.